If we're creating just to make money, it's going to be dross. It's not going to be good. And it might make you money in the short term. The first book that I wrote, I didn't realise that I was using it as a sort of preemptive catharsis, which sounds a little bit pretentious, but that's kind of what it was, because I didn't realise I was clearing something out of my system until it was gone. And then I was like, oh wait, I wrote about that. Actually, like there was something in my subconscious that knew this needed to happen. My second book was a conscious sort of dedication to a person I love. This, my first published book, The Cracks We See Through, I have used as a catharsis for many different elements. More so, like it was born as one thing and it's been rewritten over the course of about 5 years. There's so much of me in there. For me, feminism is about equal access, equal rights, equal representation for all genders, not just women, for everybody to stand at the same level and be seen as at the same place, you know?
Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. My guest today is the very talented, or should I say, multi-talented artist, Rebecca Miles Henson.
Oh.
She was a globe-trotting, fire-eating, burlesque performer before settling down and committing to write full-time. I mean, that's a fair transition. It happens all the time.
Natural, right?
Natural. Her new book, The Cracks We See Through, is out on February 15, 2025. So, if you forgot Valentine's, this is an option. But it's also available now for pre-order.
Romantic of books.
Well, if you forgot Valentine, you're not very romantic to start with. So this qualifies for that, right? But it's also available for pre-order at Compassiviste Publishing, so you can always get it there. And hello and welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues.
Hello, Ali. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Okay, let's get into this because the introduction asks its own questions. We want to know fire-eating, burlesque, family, and the transition to author. So Let's go back though. Let's go back to little Rebecca, far back memories, and how everything shaped your life to where you are.
I mean, that is quite a long time ago. My memories are a bit hazy. But I don't know. For me, it was never so much as a transition between one and the other, because I've always done lots of things at the same time. So I won't go so far back to childhood because it's not really so relevant. But when I was at university, I trained in writing, directing and performance. So I've always had my fingers in quite a lot of pies. I had a brief career break for 5 years where I was working in travel, and then I came back to performance. So I guess I originally started out in music, went through to musical theatre, to straight acting, career break in travel for 5 years, back to performance. And that's when I picked up burlesque, because I wanted to be able to control my own work and my own workload and create work for myself. And then I was a burlesque performer for 5-6 years, something like that. And I'd sort of set it in my head, well, this would be the peak. If I could perform here at this one venue, that would be the peak of my career. And I did it. And then I thought, all right, what do I want to do next? And I'd always sort of written, always, but never really considered it to be something that I could do as a career. And I thought, you know what, stop thinking about writing and just sit down and write a book. So I did. And it was all right. It was quite experimental. I think probably I was the only person who loved it, but I'm okay with that. It was my first baby. And then when I'd done that, I thought, you know what, I reckon I've got another one in me. And I just carried on writing. And after the second one, I thought, actually, this is quite good. I might be able to do something with this. And that was that. In a nutshell, that was the transition.
Okay. So there's nothing in the acting, music, burlesque that kind of guided you to writing. The writing was there all along, and it just kind of blossomed.
Yeah,
through all the other stuff that was happening in the forest of your life.
that's it. All the way through my training, I was writing. I wrote quite a lot, stage plays and that sort of thing, and I tended to prefer
Mm,
writing shorter pieces. And what I've learned about myself as a writer is that I'm very good at beginnings and I'm very good at endings, and then somehow I've got to wedge the middle in and like work. I'm not very good at plot actually, which isn't selling
mm.
myself very well. But if I can like piece together my story through shorter things, shorter portions
Mhm.
happening, then that's like a win for me. So I
Okay.
think like writing shorter pieces, stage plays, short stories, that sort of thing is just, I'm sure as it does for many writers, that's grown into writing full length novels, short full length novels, but they are technically full length.
Mm, okay. And why did you write? Because you weren't writing for work back then throughout your life. So what was the
Yeah.
purpose of writing for you?
I've always had a need to express myself creatively, whether that's been
Mhm.
through stage or burlesque was a really good way of doing it. And I realized through burlesque that what I liked to express was generally something quite dark. And that's come through in my writing as well. I don't like Freddie, I'm sorry about this.
Okay.
She's as gobby as I am.
It's okay.
I
She's
like to
just speaking her
challenge
mind.
people. Yeah, she is. She gets it from her mummy. I like to challenge people. I like to challenge people's perception of like what is attractive, what is appealing, what is entertainment. And I think I learned how to do that. I learned my own way of doing that through burlesque. And through that is sort of has shaped how I write. So I tend to write along a spectrum, which is generally quite dark, quite bleak. Um, I've forgotten what the question is. Sorry, that's the ADHD.
No, you're on track because I asked why do you write, and you're on point.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Yeah, I suppose some sort of deep need to express myself creatively and also challenge perceptions. And I like to make people feel a bit uncomfortable as well. It's sort of a
Mhm.
perverse desire I have in myself, and I don't know where it's come from. I can't seem to tame it.
You're not getting a good job here because I'm very comfortable speaking with you. So,
Well, that's good to know.
but you know what? I understand a lot of what you're saying because I started writing. I think sometimes it's something in you that maybe in a way, not biologically or DNA, but in a way innate to your soul to perform in certain way or to express in certain way. There are people who express really well through music. There are people who express really well through writing, through dance, through so many different media, that we can express through as humans. And I think what happened with me was the expression was there, but I didn't care about it. I used to get punished in writing. So when I was in school, I wasn't a bad kid, like I wasn't a bully or fights or anything like that. And I kind of attribute that to martial arts. As a child, it brings so much discipline to your life to care because you
Yeah,
know the power that you hold, and so
yeah,
you do not use it against people anymore. You kind of use it for people. So I
yeah.
was, you know, the known black belt kid who
Oh, wow.
protected everybody. So there was never any fears involved in our surroundings. But I was very naughty at the same time because school I didn't and I had good grades and everything, but I just didn't care for sitting through a class for 45 minutes to something that I understood in the first 5 minutes of that class, right? And so as punishment, I used to get put in the corner of the class and told to write stories. And short stories that I wrote, uh, you know, I had to write a certain amount of short stories to not get detention or to not be allowed to play on the team that in the next game or something. So I had always had to fight with writing to
Mhm.
earn my place in my society, in my school, in my community. And so I wrote a lot because I was often in trouble. That
A
started
punishment.
out as, yeah, it was punishment, right? But I was good at my punishment. It's kind of like eat cake for punishment. Okay, that's fine. I'll be naughty all day, right? I'll be naughty all the time. So that's how it really started. And then, I went through school. I went through a long time of schooling because I didn't want to come back home, and face what was at the time, in my culture, arranged marriages and kind of work for the family and things like that. And here I had grown up in Europe and North America and been free. I mean, I lived alone from 15 onwards, so to speak. So you can't kind of tie that person down into a traditional setting at 22. So I just, you know, told my family, "Oh, I'm in school. I can't come back," and that led to a decade of schooling. During that time, I didn't really write because my schooling was writing, because all of my work was, philosophy, political science, all this. You're writing essays, and almost, if you compile them together, there's volumes of books. But then when I left and I got into my trading career, now I didn't do drugs, I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke, I don't do anything fun, I don't gamble, nothing.
Anything
And
fun?
yeah, but the thing is, that's in the trading world, you are strung up very badly all day long, and it's a 24-hour job. You don't go home because the market doesn't stop. So it's a 24-hour job. You sleep with one eye open, and you need you need that kind of, letting that steam off. And if you don't have a vice, you crack, which is why a lot of people the higher you get in the finance industry, the more vices pop up, the dysfunctional families, like all sorts of problems, right? And I didn't have those. So for me, it went back into writing. It's like, what do I do? I've never done cocaine for me to get excited and get into that life. And I'm scared because I drag all these friends of mine to rehab all the time, and I see them go through all the detoxes and, really difficult stages. So I get even more scared to have a vice. Or I see my gambling friend who's always asking me for money, and I get worried about being in that position. So everything I saw around me was like, you can't do those. And then it kind of led me back to writing. And again, it was not for publishing. And then, when I transitioned my life from what I was doing to what I am doing, all of these writings kind of came together. And, our mutual friend, Joanna, she stepped in and she literally put the books together, literally, and so, yeah, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, she's a
Not the
legend.
talk, not, yeah,
Joe.
not the uh, publishing house, none of that stuff. But
Oh, wow.
yeah, so that's how, for me, it was a manner of, again, expressing and letting out everything that's like, uh, you know, super stressful in my life.
It's
And
so
now it's,
interesting,
yeah,
though.
yeah,
The fact that your punishment became your addiction,
release,
your
yeah,
vice, your crux.
yeah.
And like, if we look at, I don't know, our own relationships in the past, if we've got any sort of negative upbringing experience, if we potentially come from a history of abuse, then we'll tend to use that as a bit of advice going forward in future relationships. So don't you think it's fascinating that the thing that you were punished with was actually not a punishment, and you were able to still use it, trick yourself into thinking, well, maybe this is
Mm,
something a bit naughty and I'm going to use this as my addiction. And actually your teachers were very clever.
yeah, I know they were. And, you know, um, it, it's very true. And today the writing is essentially, because I do music as well. Um, I was always good at lyrics, poetry, and kind of because of vocabulary, I guess, and beats. And the funny part is, I don't play any instrument. So I sit with people I know when we make music, and I kind of sing it to them, and I say, no, the drums go like this, and the piano goes like, and they're like, oh, when are you going to learn to write a note? And I say, I'll never learn to write a note because I have the worst memory in the world. So I just don't remember enough to know. I would love to. And so everything starts with writing for me, though. It always starts with writing, and then it kind of builds all the other things around it. And so yeah, so I really have a passion for the written word. And when I got into the publishing field, I realized, speaking with you, other people, other authors, seeing books from a different perspective, it's not just the story that's being told for me. It's the fact that here's your entire expression of many different issues that are being thrown in there in a book. It's normally small, print thing or digital, and you're sharing your entire mind in that field with the whole world through that book. So now when people buy books, you're not just buying the story, you're inviting the person into your house, into your heart, into your mind. And you're having an intimate relationship with that person's thought process and being influenced by what they had to say about that.
Yeah,
Because we
definitely.
read books and then we have arguments after we read the books with people.
Yeah,
We understand people. There's so many ways we can go after reading a book. So
yeah,
in a sense, that's what I think I love doing with the publishing house, is bringing in the voices that matter and
yeah,
the stories that matter, and kind of allowing people to have a range of and variety of stories, as opposed to the biographies of every president, vice president, and
yeah, right.
CEO in the
Yeah,
world, that
that's it. A variety,
generally
a
went through the
freedom.
same thing, and it's never
Yeah,
personal because, God forbid it be used against them. So it's always some generic, ghostwriting becomes a title, and it's got a good cover, and the person's famous, so it's going to sell, and there's a big publishing house behind it. It's just business, right?
yeah,
We're losing that, and so
yeah,
I
yeah,
really
yeah.
wanted to do this for that. So, you know,
And in doing
it's
that, you give people the freedom to respond differently as well. People
Mhm.
don't have to just like it. And I really like polarizing people. You know, when I was performing, like I've said, I like to make people uncomfortable, but I also like people to have a conversation. And it's the same with my books. And something that you were just saying then really hit home, really struck me, because the first book that I wrote, I didn't realize that I was using it as a sort of preemptive catharsis, which sounds a little bit pretentious, but that's kind of what it was, because I didn't realize I was clearing something out of my system until it was gone. And then I was like, oh, wait, I wrote about that. Actually, like, there was something in my subconscious that knew this needed to happen. My second book was a conscious sort of dedication to a person I love. This, my first published book, The Cracks We See Through, uh, I have used as a catharsis for many different elements. More so, like, it was born as one thing, and it's been rewritten over the course of about 5 years. And in each rewrite, I go, oh, wait, I can put that in there, I can put that in there. So there is so much of myself, of my own experience. Like,
Mhm.
there's so much of me in there. So I'm not going to read any reviews.
No, but that's what a book should be, right? It should be you. Whereas today it's more like this sells, or this aspect of you sells. Like if you went to a publishing house that's thinking about profit, they're going to want to kind of be like, oh, write about burlesque. Do you have any dirty stories in that, entertainment lifestyle? What happened? Did you meet any celebrities? Is there any tea, here that we can sell? And then you write that book. A lot of celebrities are writing biographies or, memoirs today. And in those memoirs, there are things that they've never spoken about publicly, and all of a sudden it's there. So you have to read the memoir to get that bit. And that's
Yeah,
what's
right.
selling the book, but it's not about them anymore. It's just about that one moment that I did this, I never spoke about it, it's in there, go buy it so you can read it. And everybody's buying it, going to that page, looking at it, and closing the book.
Yeah, right.
Well, you see, and that's what I wanted to really steer away from, and allow people to do exactly what you're doing. So, as you briefly mentioned it, but we're going to get into detail now with that. First, before I ask you why it took 5 years and so many rewrites, let's do a preview to that question with a little bit about what the book's about, The Cracks We See Through. Dystopian fiction. What was the idea? Why did you think about writing that? The whole thing. Tell me.
The whole thing. Well, an overview of the book as it exists now in its final form it's dystopian speculative fiction, set in this world after civilization has basically crumbled. It's a premise that we're all very familiar with, but in this instance, all boundaries have been breached, all tipping points have been tipped, and societies have broken down into sort of tribal groups. So everybody is staying with the people that they feel comfortable with, that they feel safe with, family units or um, religious groups, pockets sort of everywhere, and no one is really communicating as an interconnected world as we currently are. And the story itself focuses on the journeys of two women. One who lives with her family on Anglesey, which is a small island off the coast of North Wales, and one who is making her way up through the Middle East. And the story focuses on the ideas of safety, security, ultimately, like, what is home? Um, and what are the things that we would fight for, and how would we fight for them? I won't go too much into plot, actually, because as I mentioned before, I'm not great at plot, but what I am really good at is writing about people. So the cracks we see through looks at our different reaction to the same stimulus. Like, how do we cope with this all of a sudden isolation? How do we cope with being split apart from everything that we thought was really important to us? And how do we decide? How do we discover what is? So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's it.
And it's when you began writing this, you weren't anticipating the you know, closer and closer mirroring of society to what you'd written about, because
Mm,
5 years ago it's kind of like predictive in a sense.
yeah.
It's
Next time
very,
I
very
write a
much.
book, I'll try
Yeah,
to
I know.
predict something a bit more pleasant than a global pandemic. Maybe
But
predict
yeah,
myself winning the lottery or something.
there you go.
Yeah, I wrote this in 2019. And
Yeah,
then
that's what I
2020
mean.
happened, and I went, "Oh, you are
Exactly.
joking!" But it did provide some very good research.
Yes, a lot of people, yeah, sitting at home for a few years does do that.
Yes, first-hand experience of that isolation I've just
I
written about.
know,
Yeah, thanks,
I
world.
know, and especially with the spaces. I mean, um, I'm very familiar with the UK as an island, and parts of it because I bring this up whenever I can. I'm very familiar with Northern Ireland, and I still kind of speak about and remind people and hold a grudge with the Troubles, and it was a very kind of dark experience. I had friends who lived through it, suffered through it, so it matters to me. And then in the Middle East, it's the same thing. I have friends um, who are Israeli. I have friends who are Jewish, not Israeli, but they connect to the space, on different levels, not just on a geographical place. And then I have Arab friends, and I have Muslim friends, and Christian friends, and atheist friends from the Middle East, and just this huge um, clash of civilization, so to speak, at this moment. And even in London, you know, a place that was such a melting pot, and um, it was very different to Canada in the sense that I always tell people the British can understand um, jokes that in North America are offensive, but the British get where it's coming from, so it's not offensive. Indian culture has been merged with the British culture for a century easily now, and there's so much within that context that people joke about. That's fine, in their world. But then you go to New York, you make the same joke, and you're going to jail. So, but now all of a sudden in the UK, things have changed so much and so drastically that it's polarizing people who don't want to be polarized, who don't want to have those perspectives, but you're kind of like attacking all sorts of people's lives and freedoms, and on so many different levels. And I think that's what I appreciate about your book, because it brings out a lot of context that people, when you read this book, you can start thinking about your life today, in specifically in those places and further beyond, but specifically in those places, and be like, I can relate. There's a character in there that I relate to, and so it's like it was. That's what I mean. It's predictive. It was really written in a way that you can see yourself living that. It's kind of like when you watch Mad Max movie, and then a natural disaster happens, and then you're like, oh my god, this could be us. Look,
Yeah,
this is exactly what could happen. One flood, our city's gone. We're living in the
yeah,
same ruins, right? And so
yeah,
your
yeah,
book does the same effect. It kind of like
yeah,
takes you to a place where you're like, okay, if the war goes the way that we're seeing it going,
yeah.
then Rebecca's book is the future. And so
Apologies in advance.
exactly, you see what I
Yeah,
mean? That's
yeah,
the feeling everybody will get, that
yeah.
it settles in the reality.
Yeah, and the scary thing is, so you asked about the sort of original concept of this book. It was a zombie book. It was a book about zombies, because I love zombies and I love all things zombie related. And I was watching some rubbish zombie thing on the telly, and I just thought, what would happen if a zombie type virus came about that only affected those with male bodies? So that was the original book, and that's how I started writing it. And it became sort of accidentally a bit of a commentary on toxic masculinity, on male
Mm-hmm.
violence, and that sort of thing. And I thought, oh, there's something in this, and I'm going to lean into this and see what happens. So that was its first iteration, and it did garner quite a lot of interest. But to sort of go down the route of its current form, became apparent that Gender Apocalypse, as I later learnt it was called, had been done quite badly previously, and some publishers had made some maybe errors of judgment in books that they had released, which didn't address the topic of sex and gender as being two different things. Sex I describe as a biological thing, and gender
Mm-hmm.
is something which lives within us, right? That's hence a man can be born into the wrong body and vice versa. I had tried to address that by talking about male bodies and not men. And I had tried to go into like the physiology of it and the science to whatever limited ability I had, thanks Google, as to, like why, what could cause this in a man's body? Okay, a hike in testosterone. What would be the results of this? Anyway, so this is the book that I wrote, and I was quite happy with the representation that I had sort of made, how I was classifying, man's body, who would be affected by this virus. But I am a woman born into a woman's body, so I'm maybe not the best judge of that. It was suggested to me by my first wonderful agent that, you know what, your writing is brilliant, but this book is not going to sell because of this gender storyline. Why don't you take it out? And I was like, whoa. Okay, what, you mean take out the entire story? Yeah, all right, let's give it a go. So I did. So I took it out. I took out everything related to a virus. I took everything out related to something that only affected men. And I literally just went through the document, delete, delete, delete. And what was left was very, very close to what you read now. And it was terrifying because actually this representation that I had created about people with male bodies being affected by this rage-inducing virus really, really close to the world that we actually live in. I was just like, oh, this is really good, and this is really scary, and this is far too close to the truth to be a comfortable place to be. So this is what I want to inhabit. And that's, again, I've forgotten the question, but I forgot what we were talking about. But that was the end of my
Continue
point.
because you're on point there. So keep going.
I'm not sure if I have anything else to add to that.
So let me take you to the part where you take out the virus and replace it and rewrite.
Didn't replace it with anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I want to make clear, that it stayed and
Yeah.
it became your
Yeah.
story.
That's
And
it.
very, I'm going to get back to that because it's very interesting, but very short. We are so parallel in this part of our journey because I had a lot of writing, and a friend of mine who is a literary agent, she just happened to be reading my writing. At this point, I quit my life. I was just living like a gypsy, and I'd given all my money away, right? And so I was literally coming off of homelessness because I was homeless for a good close to a month, but it wasn't that bad because I knew I'm coming out of it. I knew it's a phase. I knew it's something that I'm just going through. A little after that, as I was traveling and just seeing life and deciding what I want to do with my life, I met up with her because I was in the vicinity she's in. And I remember she was just sitting there. It's like, can I read some of this? I said, sure. And then she kept reading and reading and reading. And then I was like, I should like charge you for this because yeah, because I've never sold a book in my life. And then she's like, do you mind actually if I email this to myself? And I was like, why? She's like, I just want to look at it. I was like, okay. So I didn't think much of it, right? And she said, oh, there's so many different like stuff. It's really cool. It's powerful writing. And I said, thank you. And then didn't think anything about it. But a few months later, she emails me. She's like, would you like to speak to somebody in publishing to talk more seriously about your writing? And I said, sure. And, ego kicked in and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be an author. And so at that point, she introduced me to a publishing house, and it's a monster-sized publishing house. It's one of the biggest. Whoa! And I was like, I'm that good of a writer, okay. And I was so excited. You have no clue. Then they start speaking with me, and at the beginning, it was so exciting. It was so lovely in the sense that, oh, we love what you're doing, and all these things, and we love the backstory, and blah blah blah. Then we got into the stage of, well, to have a contract in place, let's look at the details a little bit. And okay, they changed everything about my book. And literally almost everything. Like, how you said take the storyline out? Like, that's essentially what happened with, I don't know if you want to say this. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if the reference to Marx, makes sense here. That is the whole concept of my writing. And then I said to them, like what we're doing now with Compassiviste Publishing, I said, I want to bring social issues to light. The paper part of publishing is just one aspect. Nobody knows where print books are being published, actually, put together and printed. So it's some place in Bangladesh or wherever else. It's not in London. I don't see any Random House Penguin Books being, big building that's a factory that, like, we pump out books in here. I don't see that. So it's being made somewhere. Where's it being made? And then you track it and you find it in some developing country with lax, labor laws and stuff. And then you go deeper, and all of a sudden you find out there's a 12-year-old kid literally binding the books, binding the glue, right? And so I say the paper issue is one thing, but now there's human rights issues. You buy a children's book, you're taking the freedom of one child to allow your child to read and have more fun. I mean, I don't think a lot of people would agree to that. Same thing with blood diamonds. We were so oblivious to the diamond industry, and everybody was just loving what was happening with just buying diamonds and looking pretty and beautiful and whatever. And then all of a sudden the truth came out and it became vulgar. Yeah. And now we have laws and regulations. So why can't we do it here? And they said, oh, you're overstepping now, right? You can't say things like that. And then I said, well, I also don't want it in print because I don't want to be part of 90% of every page is illegally sourced, the paper.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't realize that. I had no knowledge of that.
That's what I'm saying. Not a lot of people do, because these are facts that they don't tell you. It's kind of like smoking kills wasn't a thing until the profit from smoking and lobbying and everything was less than the cost of all the treatments and cancer and the insurance companies' problems and all that. So they came to them and said, no more. We're not playing this game. Now we're going to put the truth out. And then everybody stopped smoking all of a sudden, right? There's no more cigarettes. So it's kind of like a capitalist game. Wherever the market is, that's where we'll go. But at that point, I said, no print. And they said, what do you mean no print? That's how we sell books. And I said, no, we can be revolutionary. I'm in that mindset, but they're where I was when I was trading. Because when I was trading, I was buying gold and praying to every religion's god that there be a huge natural disaster or a big war and people die so that the gold goes up and I make money, right? Because otherwise, in harmony, there's no price change of gold. Everything's like just flat, right? There's no inflation when everybody's having a good time. I tell people there's no inflation when you're making love. There's inflation when you're fighting, because something in your house breaks when you're fighting. A plate, or when it gets violent, something breaks. That's inflation in your house.
Yeah, gotcha.
In the other way, it just doesn't happen, when you're having a good time. So I walked away. I had the guts to walk away. I had the ability to kill my ego and walk away from the contract. And that's really what made Compassiviste Publishing happen. Is I thought, there are so many people just like me who may not be able to say no because they have family, it's a source of income. There's so many restrictions in our lives that make us choose, immorally sometimes because we have to. It's that, like, this lesser evil sort of thing. So why not create something where all of those people can now be free of these bad decisions? And like I didn't know this about you. Like, obviously you're being published here, but I really didn't know about your story being told to change and all these things, and you standing, strong. So hats off to you.
Well,
I so
actually, I
much
did
more.
change my story because her idea was brilliant. So I gave it a go, and she was right to do it. But on that, sort of thinking about that, I was very, very lucky with this agent because she was committed to finding me when we were approaching big publishers, the editor who would not insist on big changes like that. So that was her passion. I was very lucky to find her. You know, our brains worked in similar ways, and she was looking to continue that chain. So yeah, I can't take the credit for not accepting the changes, because I considered what she said and I thought, yeah, actually that could be really interesting to work with. But I think this is the performer in me. I really like taking direction, and I won't take it blindly, and I won't take it without putting a lot of myself into it. But I quite like sort of seeing what comes from somebody else's perspective, from somebody else's ideas. And there were a few suggestions that she made that I went, no, that's not going to work on this instance. But yeah, this massive suggestion, yeah, it did. It worked really well.
Yeah, and I know what you're saying, because right now, again, with Joanna at the helm of the publishing house, she does. I only write, and I write in Pages on Apple, and I send it to her. Everything happens with her. So really, I consider myself maybe a quarter of the whole publication of any of my books, and so I take a lot of guidance from her. I take a lot of perspective. I answer a lot of her questions. I have this anxiety when she sends me back an edited piece, because there's all these red squares, which means you have to speak about something. The underlines and the spelling errors, or I don't know, conjugation and stuff, I don't care about. I'm like, okay, fine. I agree, because obviously, yes, it's right. It was the wrong term I used. But when the box is coming, it gives me this fear of, oh, what did I say wrong? And so I
Yeah,
take
right.
that, to heart, and I try to respond, because it's like you say, it's something that when you have a good agent, or when you have a good partner in work, it really helps you, grow from that.
Yeah, for sure.
Now,
Just looking at with a perspective. It's all about perspective. Oh,
yeah,
she's
it's
back.
all about perspective. Exactly. Hello. Um, Now, you call the book a celebration of color in darkness. So that was your description to the cracks we see through. Where does that come from? And what does it mean?
Yeah, so that actually came from I was talking to Joe about cover design, and I had previously thought I just want it to be black and white. That was just in my mind. And then after considering it for a bit longer, I thought, no, I can't, because this book is essentially a celebration of colour in darkness. And then it just became like, oh, wait, that's that is quite relevant. I mentioned before that I do write along quite a bleak spectrum. My books have gradually got a bit less bleak, I think, because I've realised through beta readers. I mean, long before I worked with Jo through Compassiviste, we were friends. She has beta read every single one of my books. Her, along with a couple of other people, they love the writing, but they're like, it is a bit like, can't we have anything to look forward to? Like, can't there be any kind of, can't we smile once when we're reading this? So the more I write, the more I realise this is really essential, and not just to writing, but to life. Like, we have to be able to see the sunshine. We have to be able to see the colour, because life can be really difficult. We've all got our individual circumstances, and sometimes they can really drag you down. And like, the world that we live on, it is like, it can be terrifying, and it can be really dark and really hard. And we can't really compare our own circumstance to anybody else's directly. Everybody has their own troubles. But it's so, I think, important to just be able to take a step back and go, all right, everything else is really bad right now, but I can see the sky, I can see the sun, I can hear the birds, I can cuddle my dog. Like, there she is. You have to be able to see the colour. And for me, for my own personal circumstances, I know that if all I can see is grey, then that is a slippery slope down to a place that I don't want to be. I've been there and I don't want to go back there. So I have to really make an effort to look for the colour. And that's what I try to interject in my work. And I think I've interjected that into Cracks as well, not through just sort of descriptive place setting, but through elements of the story, different lights on perspectives, and that sort of thing. I won't say too much because I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, I've tried to inject colour into it, whereas past books might need a bit of a rewrite.
Hmm. And would that be one of the main messages of the book, to kind of find, the color, or to somehow find a rainbow in a place that is maybe even scientifically impossible to see?
No, Actually,
No?
no. Because
Okay.
so I've been considering this question. When I wrote this, I didn't write it to try and get a message across. I wrote it purely from quite a selfish place. I think this ties into like writing what you think will sell or writing what you have to write for yourself. And I have only written this for myself. And the more I have rewritten it, the more I've added to it, the more selfish it has become. So it's never been about trying to give a message, trying to like put something like that out there. It's just come from a purely, first of all, experimental and then cathartic place. So there's no message. But if somebody were to take, okay, just see the colour, then that would be a win for me. But the reason that I so vehemently said no, that wasn't the message, is because I don't want to tell somebody that's what they have to do. Like,
Mhm.
if you are feeling like everything is bad, then you are completely entitled to that. Like, who knows what's going on in your life? I'm not going to force you to look at the sky. I'm not going to force you to go, toxic positivity. I'm not going to do that,
Mm.
because this is you. Like, you do you, and that's a completely valid place to be. So I think that's why I don't want to like give a message, because to me, I would feel that as being a bit preachy, because ultimately I don't know very much. I only know what I've experienced myself, and I can't
Mhm.
put that onto anybody else. So there is no message with this book, sorry.
Okay, no, that is the message. The message is to maybe, from what you're saying, me listening to you right now, the message is appreciate your circumstances and choose what you believe is best under those circumstances. And like you said, toxic positivity. Don't just say, "Oh, there's always sunshine after." And I've said that as well. If you're in a position where you're facing death, to be somehow too excited and positive and optimistic about beating that or whatever is not a strong suit, because I see cowardice in that, because you're not facing it anymore. You're kind of
Yeah,
going with that toxic positivity, like, I'm gonna beat it, everything's gonna be fine and I'm gonna do well. No, the prognosis is
yeah,
literally that bad. Like a miracle can only save you. And uh, you know those stories stopped, unicorns I see on your wall. It's not a reality. It's a piece of fantasy that we aspire to, but which gives us strength. It's a symbol of strength to kind of aspire and be hopeful. What I do every day with Compassiviste is uh, maybe even obnoxiously ambitious, but um, there is a sliver of chance that it's possible that we make change through the things that I'm trying to do. But to be, like you said, to have a message and to force people and to tell them, no, you have to live this way and you have to do this and it's better for the environment. You have to become vegan. You have to blah blah. To each their own kind of thing. And
yeah, yeah,
I think that's where education comes through. So I really appreciate people like you, because it's voices like yours that allows people to receive an education. Because when you're dictating to people, they start putting up a wall,
yeah,
right? But when you're allowing them to express alongside with what they've picked up from you, then they're like, okay, I love these things that Rebecca said. I'm gonna grab those and I'm gonna use them.
yeah,
And I kind of don't like the other stuff she said, but it's fine, because she told me whatever you don't like, just take out of the basket.
yeah, yeah,
She's not saying this is religion, you do all of it,
yeah, exactly.
and that's the problem I have with organizations, is they're so
Yeah,
forceful.
yeah,
And when you're
yeah,
saying I don't have a message, I think that is the strongest message. It's not that you don't have a message, is your message is honest. It's it's this is what I'm offering. Take what you will from it to help.
yeah, yeah. I like that, an offering. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And I
It's
mean,
an
I'm the
offering.
queen
And
of that. Like, I'm the queen of, if you tell me to do something, that is a guaranteed way of me not doing it. So I think I understand that
yeah,
that
you see what I
mindset.
mean? So yeah, and that's really, I think we can take that as a message. Now, backtrack. You spoke about gender, but you kind of like zoom through it in like 30 seconds, and so we're
Mm.
gonna spend some time there.
All right, all right.
Yeah. So one thing you said that I was like, yay, was understanding the separation between sex and gender. And I kind of understand that too, in the sense that when someone asks me about sex, I say, you know, it's a biological thing. It's nothing we can help. It's the way the universe was created. It's not something I can do anything about. I can have surgeries. There's so much I can do physically, but it'll never become that 100% biological origin of the separation. And then people start talking about, well, there are instances biologically of two sexes in a person and things like that. And I said, yeah, there are, but let's leave that as exception to the rule, right? I mean, it happens in so many different things as well. You can have a person born with one eye. It happens. There are people with one eye in the world, but we don't make grandiose decisions based on that one concept. We kind of try to compassionately build it through our systems. So if the person with one eye has requirements, we try to implement those requirements for them so that they can be involved and included, right? So it's an inclusivity issue. But for me, there is that dichotomy. This is man, this is woman. That's just how it is. But then when it comes to gender, I struggled so much because, again, I'm a male born in a man's body. Like you said, you're a female born in a woman's body. So I'm exactly there. And at first it was like, how do I learn about it, and where do I fit in all of this? And it became kind of like, do I experiment? Like, what do I do to know who I am, right? Where do
Yeah.
I learn this? Is it in a book? Is there tests that I take online? Like, do I do blood work? Like, what do I do to
Mm.
know what gender I am? And in the education, and because I have friends from all all sorts of every categorizations that you can think about, rich, poor, man, woman, male, female, almost every category that you can think about. And because I've lived, like you've traveled a lot, and I've traveled a lot too, so I've met people from different cultures who in those cultures were different as well. So it's like a very big variety of people that I've met in my life. And it got to the point where when I started understanding myself, the more I read hundreds of definitions placing you one speck of a gender on a spectrum, I realized if we just keep doing this, it becomes an infinite name calling thing where you'll need volumes of a dictionary just to know which gender you should call yourself now, and then which one you're going to be in 5 minutes, and you have to learn all this vocabulary. But the truth is, I think there is that infinite femininity on one side, and there's that infinite masculinity on one side. And then in between, I float.
Yeah.
I kind of go this way and that way with the ways that I uh, make choices, decisions, and actions. If we
Mm.
look at a lot of the conflicts in the world, it's because of patriarchy. It's because of resources. I have to make sure I have my resources. I have to make sure I protect. I have to make sure ABC things that come from early civilization. It hasn't changed at all. It's just our tools make it look so fancy now because we have technology. We are the same cave people up
Mm.
here.
Don't get
And
me
so
started on the patriarchy, but yeah.
but that's what gender to me becomes, right? And
Yeah.
so it gets to the point of how do you start changing that? And I'll tell you something. Um, 2 days ago, I'm with friends. There are women in the kitchen. I'm sitting there at their place, and they are making food. And one of the daughters, I think, put too much salt in the food, and so one of the aunts came and fixed it. She added some other things, and it group work happened. At night, I was at a friend's restaurant, and one of the sous chefs made a mistake in preparing a dish, and one of the chefs grabbed the plate and broke it and started yelling at it. And I saw how women fixed a food that was bad, and I saw how men trashed each other over food that was bad. And I realized how important it is to be on the right side of gender, if you can call it that, in your decision making, and how much progress it can bring. So I want to know, that's my philosophy in gender. It's a spectrum. You can float through it. The closer you can keep yourself to the feminine and aspire to continuously push towards that infinity of femininity, the closer you are to alignment with Mother Nature to me. And that's the infinite femininity. It's the universe itself. She's a female to me. Because look at the love, look at the abundance, look at how everything's made in the world naturally without our involvement, right? Everything's so beautifully aligned. And that comes from, like, it can only come from that femininity in art. It cannot come from a space of um, going to the patriarchy. And so that became my concept. It became, how do I continuously push to become the most feminine I can be?
Mm.
And people take that out of context and they're like, wait, what did you just say? Like,
Yeah.
are you transitioning? I said, no, it's not about that. You got to understand what I'm trying to say, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's why I put the E at the end of Compassiviste, because
Yeah.
the idea of compassionate activist, it can stop at the T.
Yeah.
But the
Right.
E means we're feminine,
Feminine. Yeah.
you know, by Latin, like
Yeah. Yeah.
structure
Yeah.
of a word. And so I want to know your perspective
So I think
of
what
all
we're
of this.
talking about here is, for me, what I'm picking up is that these are essentially, my understanding is these are three different things. So we're first of all talking about gender when it pertains to our own experience of our own personal gender. We're talking about gender roles within the patriarchy, and we're talking about labeling. That's what I've picked up from what you've just said. So with regards to gender roles, to our own lived experience, I'm a little bit hesitant talking about this because I can only come at this from my own experience, and that's why I've had a trans woman sensitivity read for this book, because I was aware that I was talking about matters that I don't have first-hand experience of, and whilst I believe that representation is really important, I have to make sure that I am doing it sensitively and in a way that a community that I'm not a part of will be able to go, yeah, okay, she's not stepping on toes, or she's not talking about something that she's got absolutely no experience of. I don't have any experience of being a trans person, but I do have experience of being an empathetic human, and that's what I try to bring to my telling of this particular character's tale. So, talking about gender, I completely agree with you when you say that gender is a spectrum. That's how I experience it as well. And if this is masculine and this is feminine, although I describe myself as being a woman in a woman's body, I hover somewhere around here. So I don't ever identify as a he, but I quite often identify as a they, which is me saying I'm not really that invested in my own gender. But that is just my experience. And I suppose my understanding. So when we're talking about sex and gender, those are very much my own understanding of them. And I'm, again, not trying to come across and be like, well, this is right,
Mhm.
because I accept it means something different for probably everybody, even though I really relate to what you're saying. Still, probably the fine details of our understanding might be different.
Mhm.
Talking about the femininity and masculinity within the patriarchy. God, that was a lot of big words in one small sentence. I do absolutely agree. And this is down to not just gender, but gender roles throughout history. And the reason that women are better at working together is because we have always had to.
Mhm.
And that's why you see your friends coming together to fix a problem, because that is what we have had to do, like, throughout history to survive. And that is why business groups just for women have been set up, because women help each other. And women don't necessarily want somebody to come in and fix a problem for them. They want to work out how to do it themselves. I once knew a person who was absolutely incensed with the fact that he was a man and he couldn't go to a business meeting set up just for women, because surely they need somebody like me to go in there, and that's true inclusivity. And I just couldn't get it through to him. That's not what this is about. So that's, I think, if we're talking about yin and yang, I can't remember which is which, but one is masculine, one is feminine. And these aren't just about the sex that we're born into, but it's about the perception of the person in front of you as history has determined.
Mhm.
Again, this is not something I have a great amount of education on, but it's just from my own experience. And then we're talking about labeling. And for me, when we're even saying the words masculine and feminine, that is just labeling something. That is just labeling qualities that exist inherently in everybody, male or female, whatever body we have. So I've always had a problem with the labels. I've always had a problem with a label in my own gender, with a label in my own sexuality, with any sort of label. And it's not because I like massively want to live outside of a box, but it's because the minute that we label something, we put this emphasis on it that it has to conform to that label, where, like you're saying, we all exist on this vast spectrum of experience and with every single element of our life. So yeah, I mean, I think pretty much complete agreement with most of the things that you have said, apart from I just hate labeling things like that. But I also appreciate, like, if we don't give something a name, it's hard to know what it is, and that falls
Right.
into representation.
Right.
So I'm kind of tying myself in knots here and going around in circles, and I don't know what the answer is.
No, and you're right about labels, which is why I don't use any of the terms. I just say there's on the spectrum, there's that infinite um, side, which we can say a lot of things to understand what we're talking about, or we can just call it femininity, right, for the
Yeah,
ease of
yeah.
conversation. And on the other side, we call it
You're
infinite
right, you're
masculinity
right.
for the ease of conversation. But that's all it is. It's just for the
Yeah,
ease of conversation. But then there's no need to mention 3,000 words in the middle that we can build another 3,000 words for, because there will be an
yeah,
inch to move all the time. And to come back to what you said about sex and gender, it does. I have spoken, and I know trans people, and you know what it is. It's from my perspective. I don't see a lot of the things, just like you said, but that's my perspective, because for me, gender and sex don't ever clash,
mm,
right? But that's because I live in a body that my gender kind of flows through comfortably. But now, if I didn't feel that way, now you have a whole new set of experiences and
yeah,
things that you're going through that completely change that. And it affects sex as well, right? Now you're starting
yeah,
to think about the integration and the ways that they're not flowing together, this body and this soul. And so that's where a lot of people, I guess, don't understand, because they're not. When I was in school, I forget the philosopher's name and I forget the book's name, but the whole concept was we can never vicariously express what it feels like to be a rabbit.
yeah,
We'll never be a rabbit. We can, observe, we can kind of sense, what's going on to a degree, because we have similar sentient moments, right? So if the rabbit gets bit by a predator, ooh, that hurt. If the rabbit's dying, oh my God, it's getting eaten. If the rabbit's happy hopping around, we kind of try to understand that, but we will never know what it's like to be thinking as that rabbit. So, like you said, it's really limiting, and each person has a perspective limited to their own experiences. And I really dislike when people come out there and, like you say, they force an opinion. They're like, this is right. I'm like, on what account?
yeah,
Because if you look at the prerequisites for your right to be right, it's a host of prerequisites that you just take for granted because you look at things from your perspective, right? And you don't do that, but you are presenting a perspective in your work that you kind of bring to the world. And in that perspective, I think I really liked it because it really aligns with what I was sensing there, and it made me happy to feel like I'm not crazy thinking about it this way. That there are other
yeah,
people who are thinking about it this way. So,
yeah, right.
with what are your thoughts about where you're writing in your book, especially this book, The Cracks We See Through, um, can go with gender issues and discussions, and bringing another voice into the conversation? Because ultimately, that's in the book, whether you like it or not, or whether you say it's only from my experience.
Yeah,
You've said it, you've put it out there,
yeah.
you've put your 2 cents there. So now that it's there, where is it going? What are you aspiring to?
I think if this character's story can become a talking point, can become a point of conversation, and, maybe a point of argument, then at least people are talking, and at least people are like seeing themselves on the same playing field, and then we're not all different. Like, we are essentially all so similar. We have different experiences, but I believe, we have access to this place of empathy and compassion within us. Like, I think everybody has that. It's just whether or not they choose to or have been taught to
Mhm.
access it. Like, if we can have a conversation about othering people, if we can have a conversation about the people that we have othered, or more importantly, if we can have a conversation with those people, like, I don't know, maybe it will help create some sort of unity that perhaps, you mentioned earlier about a certain well-known writer who is creating quite a lot of division within certain communities, and perhaps going forward we can have a conversation. I recently read something that Eddie Izzard had said, and she said that we shouldn't have all jumped on this person for making the comments that they've made because they're entitled to their opinion. What we should have done is say, okay, let's have a conversation about this. And maybe that's, I didn't intentionally set out to make gender a divisive issue when writing this book, but it has become one. But from that, we can have a conversation about it. I think that's what I want to say.
Yes, and I find you're absolutely on point there, because a lot of the problems don't actually happen with an opinion being put out in the world, whether that person is a celebrity or uh, not. The problem starts when we take that, and instead of having the conversation and having the campfire and saying, let's talk this through, we're like, oh my God, you said that. And uh,
Yeah,
then there's war.
yeah,
That is the invitation to war, because we reacted to that,
yeah.
right?
It's that
And
reaction. Yeah,
right, and the
we have
person
to
may
learn to
not
respond, not
initially,
react.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And the thing with the reaction is, then it triggers the person, like, okay, now what do I do?
yeah,
Yeah, and then it never stops, and that
yeah,
is part of the patriarchy, right? That is what
yeah,
that ingrains. And so a lot of
yeah,
misinformation, conflict, war, disinformation, all of these negative concepts of communal kind of inclusivity goes out, because
yeah,
that mentality, that mindset is not about trying to resolve. It's about winning.
yeah,
Like you
definitely.
said, we've been that way for millennia. When two men went out for a hunt,
Hmm.
and they caught food and brought it back, and let's just say they weren't working together, they weren't going to share the food. The one man hunted and got the food, the other man is going to try to kill this man to take the food.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah,
how
yeah,
it was resolved. It was never like, hey, how about we share? It was never
yeah,
that conversation.
yeah,
But
yeah,
then back in another sector, there are women doing a lot of things together to make sure that the environment is as good as it can be, to keep this civilization going, right?
mm,
The species going. I mean, we could have been, if women didn't care for the newborns, chances are very likely that there would be no human today.
mm,
So to think that it's that masculine way that got us to where we are today, it's
mm.
toxic in itself, because, like, how do you say that when all the nurturing comes from the other side, right? So
Yeah.
I
And it's
find
interesting, like,
that's the important message that you're bringing here.
I think it, like, even evolutionarily, we
Hmm.
are conditioned to react to threat, fight, flight, or freeze.
Hmm.
That that has that exists because when we were living in caves, if we got bit by a snake, like, we would need to know, like, how do I react in this
Hmm.
situation? That's why we hold on to negative experiences, because we are
Hmm.
evolutionarily wired,
Yes.
made to respond like that. And perhaps this is a part of what you're saying, back in the days where we were cave people, that's how it was. But we have come so far, and we understand now, the scientific importance of things like compassion and empathy. And we are intelligent beings. Like,
Are we?
we can. Yeah, I think inherently we are, but it's how we use that
Okay.
intelligence. Like,
You
do
see?
we keep
Yeah.
repeating the same patterns that evolution has sort of set in place for us, or do we go, well, we can shift this? I'm really lucky to be in a loving relationship with a member of the opposite sex, and we have a little boy, and he could not be a more present male figure in our little boy's life. I'm really lucky like that. So I can see it can be done. I hate the fact that I've just described myself as being really lucky because I feel it is my right to be in that relationship. Just,
Yeah, that,
as a
see what I mean?
byline.
It always,
Yeah,
yeah, it always creeps in, doesn't it? Like
yeah, it does.
it's so deep that it
Yeah,
takes
it is
so many
so
it,
deep.
it, it really takes a community to change all of
Mm,
us, because in every conversation we do it. I do it all the time too.
mm,
And sometimes I catch myself like you did, and sometimes I don't. And
mm.
I feel worse. And I point this out. I have meetings sometimes, and I catch myself slipping, but I don't catch it in the meeting, and I catch it later on when I think about it, or when I review something, or and I'm like, oh, that was just wrong. But then
Mm.
I don't only get upset at myself. Go back to the people in that meeting. I'm like, excuse me, did you
Yeah,
genuinely also were so oblivious that you didn't catch this, or were you just being polite because
yeah,
you didn't
right.
want to raise hell in the middle of that? And I say that is wrong, because you
Yeah,
need to stop that whenever you see it,
yeah,
right? And I tell people, stop it. And so I think it requires that whole, you know everybody coming together,
yeah, I
inclusive,
agree.
united, to be able to do that, to make that change. And like you said, that's your perspective, that the relationship you're in, and both parties are involved in a way that is raising another human in the way that they feel should, and be the best version of that human growing up. And
Yeah,
that is the ideal that everybody tries to reach for, in a sense. And for those who think they're so close to the ideal, then that's very beautiful. They've set up, their setup is done in a way that it allows for that privilege, and it allows for that ability to enjoy that. And I think it just comes down to us, like you keep saying, being able to have those conversations, being present in them, appreciating the different perspectives, appreciating the different. I mean, we do this with so much else too. With clothing, we've come to a point that we're accepting of things that we wouldn't do. With hair,
yeah,
you have blue hair. You can have blue hair today, right? It's fine. You can go to the theater in your hair today.
yeah,
But this was evolution, because in the
yeah, yeah,
1700s you couldn't, right?
yeah,
So there's
yeah,
this is part of that evolution, and I love that. I mean,
absolutely.
I see people with tattoos, piercings, things that were no,
Yeah,
they're just a no, just a century ago, and
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
the allowance kind of inherent to everybody is exactly what you're speaking about. It's that
yeah,
reaching in of a father today saying, yeah, that's the color hair my son wants to have, that's fine. And thinking back 2 generations and saying, if you were a father 2 generations ago, you would have the belt out when your kid came home with that hairstyle, right? And that was normal to do that. So we reached into compassion, we allowed the progress there, but then somehow we're still tied into this mentality where we need to dictate and rule and own, and
yeah,
it kind of plays, it becomes troublesome there. And
yeah. But I think this is why we all have to like play our own individual part. Like the biggest thing that I can do is raise my son so that he isn't that dictating person,
Mhm,
so that he is the most feminine version of himself, for
mhm,
to coin the phrase that we've been using.
right.
Yeah, that when I think about like what can I do to make a difference to society, to the world, what sort of benefit can I be? It's small changes. That's really all I can do. But if everybody made those small changes, and we're talking a lot about compassion, which is so important, but I also think a little bit of anger is important, because with anger we can fuel this fire to change the things that we see as injustices. I am a self-proclaimed angry feminist, and like I will fight for women's rights, because
Mhm.
to include women's rights is to create an even playing field. So I think that if we are passionate, we need to have an amount of anger as well as an amount of compassion, because that
that
is the
that is
only
the
way that we're
that's the
changing things.
passion, that's the passion in compassion,
Yeah, right.
right? Isn't it? Isn't the anger
Yeah,
the
I've never
passion in
considered that, but
compassion? I
yeah.
mean, I remember, I've seen this around a lot on YouTube and other places. The actor Keanu Reeves was on a show, on a talk
Love
show, and
him.
yeah, something happened where he says, "No, you have to fight for love," right? And they were talking about peace, being peaceful and stuff, and and he said, no, that you have to fight. And the truth is, yes, you have to fight. You have to be angry to have those things, because we're in a place that we don't. And so you're absolutely right. We really need to um, be angry, and it's fine to be angry, because if we just sit back and say, oh, well, yeah, it's okay, we're going to extinction in so many different ways, not just natural disasters, but just humans evolving to a place where the others become so much. And we're starting to see that now. I mean, Europe is on a brink of reviving fascism. I mean, every election is going to the far right and extremism, and parties that were associated with Nazi mentality and things. And it's kind of like, how did that happen? Because these are very intelligent people. How are they reliving history just one generation ago, at a time when people are still alive from that generation, right? And you're thinking, it's not a lack of intelligence, it's just a lack of anger to bring people together. And that softness of bringing people together is yielding to the angry mob that says, well, then let's separate everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's it. I think
you're seeing some wonderful things that you're raising with that.
it's having that anger and it's channeling it in a way which is not destructive. It's
Mhm.
channeling it into, getting something done rather than destroying what's already there. I mean, we can take things apart without destroying them, It's my
Yes,
feminist
definitely.
perspective anyway.
No, it's very true. What I ask this often. Um, what is feminism to you?
Oh God. Again, I
Yes,
don't feel educated on this.
no. What does it mean to you? Because and I'm not asking for a historic perspective. Nothing. When people say, "Are you a feminist?" and you say yes, and you just said, "I'm a self-proclaimed angry feminist." What does the word feminism mean to you? Because that's become a problem as well for me.
Mm, yeah,
It's there are so many different ways that people um, either associate with that word or position that word. Like you said, they label it, and then that label becomes toxic in itself, because all of a sudden there are these negative connotations that may not be part of the perspective, but because we're labeling it and we're throwing everything into that box, then so that's why I want to
yeah.
know, what
So
does it mean to you, because it kind of plays into the gender roles and the understanding of the characters.
yeah. I had a conversation probably about 20 years ago with one of my best friends. And I said to her, I'm not a feminist. And she said, yes, you are. Don't you want equal rights for everybody? And I was like, yeah, that's what I want. She went, well, that's what feminism is. Whereas I had thought that feminism was just a bunch of women standing around complaining about things, which at the time I took as being a bad thing. But the more I have lent into this idea of like, well, I thought everything was equal, but actually, if you look at it, it's really not. Like, I'm not even going to take the lid off of this massive can of worms because we don't have an entire week to discuss. But
Hmm.
for me, feminism is about education, educating everybody, especially the people who think everything's fine, about why it's not fine, about why sexes and genders are both skewed towards the masculinity. And I don't know if you've read a book by Caroline Criado Perez called I think it's called The Invisible Woman, and it is all about how women are not reflected in data. And I was an angry feminist before I read that, and now I'm a furious one because everything is catered for men. The default man, they call it, men's
Yes.
bodies, men's
Even
sensibility.
science, right? Even our
Yeah,
medication.
yeah,
Yeah,
everything's tested on
I know.
men. Yeah,
Everything.
everything. And
Yes.
women have a completely different physiology. So
Hmm.
before I get on my massive feminist soapbox, for me, feminism is about equal access, equal rights, equal representation for all genders, not just women, for everybody to stand at the same level and be seen as at the same place. That's what I believe feminism is. And
Okay.
thank you to my
I
amazing friend Andrea for pointing me in the right direction.
I am in agreement with you 100%. I wouldn't add anything else when people ask me, what is it that you would like to see? through feminism, and I respond in the same way you do, actually. So it's beautiful to hear again. Now, for people wanting to reach you, not just for the book, but just generally, they're inspired, they like some of the things you say, they want to get in touch with Rebecca. Um, where do they go?
Probably the best place at the moment is my Instagram account or my
Okay.
Facebook account. I know they're not massively professional. I am in the process of having a website built, so I shall become a new elevation of professional within a month or so.
Okay.
But you can find me at Becca Tells Tales on Instagram, or Rebecca Miles Henson, and Rebecca Miles Henson on Facebook as well, although I don't tend to use it very much.
Becca Tells Tales. I remember the first time I met you was in that email, and I was like, "Wow, that's such a catchy, um, you know, title. I love that. Who is this person?" And Joanna said, "Oh, it's a friend of mine." And I said, "Oh, I love that. Becca Tells Tales. It's so cool."
So I met
Yeah.
Jo. I don't know if you know the story as to how I met Jo, but it's because one of my other hats that I wear is I'm a voiceover artist, and she was
Hmm.
looking for somebody to narrate her books. And I narrated the first book that she had produced in audio form, Forgotten Places. So yeah, the Becca Tells Tales thing comes from, like, I tell all tales, and whether or not they're true, or mine or somebody else's. So, yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like that. You should keep it always. Thank you for having this kind of candid conversation. That's obviously not about your, short fire questions about your book, but really what I wanted to do was get the audience to know you a little bit. So when they're reading, they can understand where all of these things come from and what you're trying to say and what you're trying to write for yourself, because the book's written for you. And if people don't know you, they don't know what they're reading at that point, right?
Yeah.
So it was imperative for me to kind of draw out Rebecca from there. And the final question before I let you go: burlesque. How? Yeah, you know why I ask is because a lot of people position a lot of art into these wrongful, you know, even if labeling is not good, but they place them into these wrongful labels. And um, back in the days, I was in a relationship with a highly well known person in that industry, and I learned, that was the first time I learned to separate art really from just the vulgarity of it, and to me it was a very different learning, because before that I'd grown up as a um, Middle Eastern kid, whether in Europe or in Dubai at the time, with an understanding of attraction, sex, all the natural human emotions in a godly manner. Even in boarding school, it was like that. Even in Catholic school, it's like that. And you get these like yes and no things, and that's it. That's where it stops. And then when you grow up and you you know you're privileged enough to be able to have all the experiences that I've been able to have with relationships and people that I've met in my life and all of that. You start learning and expanding your horizons. And so in that specific relationship, it really gave me a perspective of understanding just the entertainment, the art, the messaging, the power, the feminism in the powers that people hold in their work, in the portrayal and the movement and everything else that happens. And if it wasn't for that relationship, part of me, I know that a part of me would have still held on to that traditional religious view of life. And that plays a really big role because, you know, as a very conservative, for example, Muslim or Catholic or Jewish person or any religion, you tell them, my fiance um, has a show in Vegas and this is what they do. And that's the end of that marriage because they don't understand. It's not that it is inherently wrong. I mean, I would label comfortably and call selling heroin to people inherently wrong. that is an immoral business to get into. All aspects of it are immoral, whether you're in the money laundering side of it or actually selling it or producing it. I find that there. But then you come to art, and there is a place where I do also agree is immorally wrong for the purposes that you're, performing a certain type of art and calling it art. And I find the distinction now between what is actually art. And I find a lot of people blur the lines so much that it's losing its artistic value to the capitalist value of the essence of what it was meant to be. And so you being somebody who, like you said, did that for 5-6 years, I want to know what you were experiencing and what you took from that in your life.
So there's a couple of things that I just want to pick up on. First of all, I think your very initial question was something about separating the art from the vulgarity of it. Can I just get you to expand on the word vulgarity? What do you mean by that?
Yes. So the vulgarity is this. Burlesque is an art. And now when people come into the capitalism of burlesque, what they do is they say, okay, people are coming to watch a show. There's a hinge of sexuality involved. There's a hinge of attraction. There's a hinge of dance. There's all these things happening together. How do I expand on that? How do I get more money out of this?
Yeah.
Okay, let me start a strip joint. Now, how do I expand that a little more? Let me get the person in the strip joint to now offer further services in the champagne room.
Okay.
How do I now expand further on that? And it's the capitalism, because there's no art involved at that point.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
in the production of the show, there's art. You are
Yeah.
choreographing a show. I would say in the champagne room, there is no more art. It's just a matter of transactional services. And that becomes no longer part of the art. To me, because we live in such a highly strung capitalist society, we continuously look for where is the profit maximization moment of this art or of whatever it is. Even with food,
Yeah.
you go to a restaurant, how do I make more money? Let me deteriorate the quality of the food that I'm serving.
Yeah.
Hence McDonald's, right?
Yeah. So what
That's
I
what I meant.
really like is that your definition of vulgar is about capitalism and not about sex work or anything on that spectrum.
No, not at all.
That's what I just wanted to check up on, and I
Yeah.
really
No,
like
it
that
is.
is the vulgar part. So my experience of it was that, well, first of all, it was just a means of performance with which I could make money. So I think I went the opposite direction from the one that you've just described, because the more I learned into it and the more I learned and the more I created and performed, I sort of grew myself into the character. So generally as a burlesque performer, you don't perform as yourself, you perform as a character. But it's like with anything, when we're writing, we put ourselves into it. So that was my sort of process with it. And I was definitely, my most popular acts were the ones that I hadn't created to make money. It was, I didn't use feathers, I used chains, I ate fire, I poured wax and all of that sort of stuff. But I think for me, the most important thing that I learned, sorry, she's barking again, come on. The most important thing that I learned was that, like, there's a very big grey area between burlesque and sex work, and that's fine, because neither one is better than the other, and sex work is work. And that was like, my opinion on that had been formed by other people's opinions and not by anything that I'd experienced. But through working in an environment where you're making money taking off your clothes, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself, about the things that you'll tolerate, and you learn a lot about, like, well, what it is to be working in, with that being your selling point, I've forgotten your question again. I'm really sorry. It's the ADHD. Might have to edit
You
some of
were on.
this.
No, you're on point answering. I gave you my understanding of separating art from
Art
the
and capitalism.
vulgarity, right? And
Yeah.
capitalism, exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you were almost there
Oh
explaining
no, still
how,
so
yeah,
close.
yeah.
So yeah, I think the same can be said for burlesque as it can be for writing or any sort of creative expression. If we're creating just to make money, it's going to be dross. It's not going to be good. And it
Mhm.
might make you money in the short term, but it probably won't. I mean, unless you capitalize on something that proves to be very popular, because people do love a pattern, don't they?
Mm.
But for me, yeah, my most popular works were ones that I had done for myself. And now as a writer, the writing that resonates the most with people is writing that I've done for myself. And I have tried to write for the purposes of getting a book deal and making money, but it never goes very well because I have mentioned a few times I'm not very good at plot. I'm trying to set people up now reading this book. Did that answer the question?
To a degree,
To a
yes,
point.
and yeah, and I think you've answered it in a little bit in saying that you understand the capitalism is the problem, which is really
Yeah,
what I wanted to get out of you as a person
yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah,
industry to have seen
yeah,
that. And I think, like you said, it's in all forms of arts, even in music. There was a time when people sang because the song had a story and it related to a moment in their lives, right? And it meant something. And today, if there's, like you said, a catchy beat, people like repetition. So,
yeah, yeah,
DJs do that often. They take music from all over history, throw a catchy beat to it, and then it becomes, a club banger. And then next thing you know, a lot of people are downloading it. You're making money, but the creative perception of that is not there. You're kind of doing what Marx was complaining about, essentially. The capitalism of the art. It was his
yeah.
honest complaint.
That's it.
And I think you're saying yes, that is the problem. It's not
Yeah,
the actual. It's and then when you get into the capitalism and you dissect it with status quos and religion and all these things to basically capitalize further from this, then that's when the problems kind of really
yeah. Because your
open.
slippery slope in that example was like
Yes.
make more money, open a strip club, bring in like more sort of base elements. And yeah, like I said, I love that was the problem, was the capitalism. You also mentioned about burlesque as a feminist, and I hadn't realized how empowering it is to stand on a stage, take your clothes off to a paying audience, and then we'll be eating at the palm of your hands. Like that for me is pure feminism. You're
Mm.
here to
Hmm.
witness my naked body and you're going to pay me for it, and I don't have to do anything I don't want to. That is pure power for me.
Yeah,
And
and,
it
and
is,
and you control the audience on top of
yeah,
it, right? I mean, how
yeah,
much more empowering can all of that be? And like I
yeah,
said,
agree.
I am so grateful to that relationship because it really allowed me to see all of that from backstage.
Mm,
Like I was backstage, I was like, oh my god, that's so and so, like celebrity, and they're like, and
yeah,
it's kind of like, wow, that power, that much power, and that much power for yourself. There was no, you know, capitalism involved in that
yeah,
because,
no,
it just it doesn't do that. They can't buy you at that
yeah.
level. The
And the
capitalism
thing is,
doesn't kick in.
generally the arts don't pay very well. So if we're
No,
creating, we normally do it for ourselves. Same with
exactly.
burlesque. It doesn't always pay that well. So you're not doing it to make money. You're doing it to say something or to be
Yes,
a part of
it's
yourself.
exactly. It's the expression again, right? It's
Yeah,
it's another medium of expression, just like
yeah,
writing,
yeah,
versus
yeah.
another medium of the capitalism growing. So thank you for that explanation, and thank you for the book. The book's amazing. I got to tell you, it
Thank
it is
you.
good. Okay,
Thank you
and
so
and,
much.
and when I read it, um, even though I know you haven't lived for 30 years in the Middle East and you have it set through certain areas and things that are going on, um, it doesn't. It's not like a lot of Western depictions of what is happening. Being that it's in a world how you've presented it, but still, there's a lot of elements of that you've been able to bring out as if you were living in a family in that space, or understanding that space in a way. So that was really um, well done, I should say. That was really
Thank
well done
you.
because I went to school in North America at a time where the Middle East wasn't so known, other than little wars and terrorism and stuff. I mean, when I used to tell people I'm from Dubai, I had to show on the map or reference Iran or Iraq or some other countries that are better known because of disasters. It wasn't because of the glam of Dubai today. But today you say Dubai, everyone's like, oh, they know it already. And so at that time, a lot of people were writing books about the Middle East. I was like, no, we don't live like that. We don't do
Yeah.
this. We don't do that. But, yours is very, you've done your research, so to speak. So it's a really well written book from many, many different ways of looking at it, not just the story,
Thank
not
you.
just the expression, not just the gender issue, but even the context and everything about it was really. I'm proud and I'm privileged that this landed here. It's not just a book that, because I'll be very honest with you. I don't be around the bush. As a starting publishing house, we're looking for authors, but at the same time, I'm saying no to a lot of things that come my way because there are specific things that I want to raise in this publishing house. And you are a powerful voice for the right kind of message that I want to see in the world. Again, without labeling or without forcing, but we do need feminism and we do need strong women and we do need stronger females to be able to come out there and support that and to say we're here, we're going to make change and we're going to create that inclusive space. So that's part of the storytelling that I want to promote and I want to back and I want to essentially say, yeah, I'm going to throw my weight behind people like Rebecca as well. So
Thank you so much.
it's a privilege to actually
It
do
really
that.
means a
So,
lot. Thank you so much. You're so kind. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues
Oh,
today.
it's been a pleasure.
And
Thank you for
thank you,
having me.
Freddie, for being here as well. And there you are. Hi, Freddie. And thank you for an inspiring perspective on gender, inclusivity, the power of burlesque, and purpose in your writing and your art. To our audience, please subscribe to Compassiviste Dialogues channel and share so that we can bring more stories like this for you. Follow us on our social media. All links to Rebecca Miles Henson will be listed below, along with her book. We're here to help change the world together. I'm Ali Hori.